Okay, I just had another holy Hannah moment. I kicked off a last-minute live stream to watch the hearing today, and every time Mr Breenan opened his mouth, I was double-checking everything that he said. So when he said the doctor at the hospital could lay the foundation for admissibility of the BAC, blood alcohol tests, well, there's that pesky little 9-hour delay that I thought might be an issue. And of course we ended up down another rabbit hole, doing math again. But before we do the math, let's talk about the admissibility of blood draw extrapolation in Massachusetts. Retrograde extrapolation, that is, estimating a past blood alcohol level or drug concentration based on a later blood draw, in Massachusetts depends on multiple factors, including reliability and relevance under the Daubert-Lanigan standard. We're all well familiar with what that is by now, aren't we? Under the Daubert-Lanigan standard, the scientific reliability of a blood draw taken 9 hours after the fact significantly increases the uncertainty in extrapolating an earlier blood alcohol or drug level. The intended use of the test is if the blood draw was taken for medical treatment, that is in a hospital setting, the methodology may not meet forensic standards. And that's because hospital blood draws use serum or plasma. You may note Lally kept saying, and now Mr Breenan keeps saying, serum plasma, which sounds like it's one thing, but it's not. It's serum or plasma. They're two separate things. And either or can, and usually do, result in artificially higher readings compared to whole blood used in forensic analysis. We'll come back to the difference between the three types of blood draws, but for now, let's talk about Massachusetts case law on delayed blood draw extrapolation. Massachusetts courts may allow extrapolation testimony, but only if the prosecution proves it's scientifically reliable, and if it is relevant and does not cause prejudice. If the delay is too long, for example 9 hours, courts may rule that the extrapolation is too speculative. But you know our Auntie Bev, she likes to remind us that she has the discretion to include or exclude evidence if the probative value is outweighed by the risk of misleading the jury. The fact that she allowed it in during the last trial means she's probably going to allow it in during this trial. However, Massachusetts courts have excluded poorly supported extrapolation testimony, especially when it's based on hospital methods rather than forensic protocols. So let's get into that without even worrying about the 9-hour delayed blood draw, which under normal circumstances would be highly questionable in a criminal case, and we'll focus on just the testing method alone. Let's start with whole blood BAC. This is the forensic standard that is accepted in courts in Massachusetts. Whole blood contains red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Alcohol distributes evenly through the blood. This is the only legally recognized BAC measurement used in forensic toxicology and DUI cases. Hospitals do not use whole blood testing for alcohol because it's not needed for medical treatment. Plasma BAC is the medical standard for monitoring patients. If you extract the red and white blood cells, what's left is plasma. It's the fluid portion of blood after the red and white cells are removed. Because alcohol is water soluble, plasma has a higher concentration of alcohol than whole blood. For that reason, plasma BAC results are 15 to 25% higher than whole blood BAC results. Plasma BAC is used for medical purposes only, not for forensic purposes. Serum BAC is another medical standard. Serum is similar to plasma but has clotting factors removed. Serum BAC is even more concentrated than plasma BAC because of the volume of liquid is slightly reduced. Serum BAC results are 20 to 25% higher than whole blood BAC results. Like plasma, serum is not legally valid without conversion to whole blood values. This is an important concept because whole blood values are the only acceptable forensic blood draw extrapolations accepted in Massachusetts courts. In Commonwealth versus Culturi 1999, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts ruled that BAC test results must be scientifically valid and meet the forensic reliability standards, not medical. Courts have excluded poorly supported extrapolation testimony, especially when it's based on hospital methods rather than forensic protocols. And whole blood BAC is the forensic protocol. Now, you may recall, during trial 1.0, the Commonwealth claimed that Karen Reed's BAC was 93 milligrams per decilitre, expressed as a percentage which most of us are more familiar with, that is 0.093%. If it was a whole blood BAC, then the Commonwealth wouldn't be using the term Serum Plasma BAC, so we can safely rule out whole blood. Side note, for the sake of the argument, I am going to include whole blood, but if this were strictly a serum BAC of 93 milligrams per decilitre, then the 15 to 25% difference would bring it back to about 74 milligrams per decilitre, or 0.074% alcohol. Before we launch into the math, let's just start at the legal limit, okay? 0.08. That would be 80 milligrams per decilitre. If the BAC test were a serum test, then 80 milligrams per decilitre at around 15% overestimation would come to 92 milligrams per decilitre. That's the lower end of the error margin. The higher end would be 80 milligrams per decilitre at 25% overestimation. That would bring it up to 100 milligrams per decilitre. This means a legally sober person below 0.08% could appear legally intoxicated above 0.08% if a serum BAC is misused in court. What do we mean by misused? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's get into the math. The forensic formula for calculating BAC is called the Widmark formula. That is, alcohol consumed in grams over body weight in grams times R, which stands for the alcohol distribution ratio, times 100 minus the elimination rate times the hours passed. I'm going to have a wild stab at her body weight, and she is a tiny little thing, so I'm guessing she's around the 45 to 50 kilo mark. So the Commonwealth claims that she had 9 vodka shots over a 3-hour period. Based on a standard shot glass of 1.5 ounces, or 44 millilitres for the metric people out there, filled with 40% ABV, stands for alcohol by volume, liquor like vodka, whiskey or rum, would be around 17.6 grams of pure ethanol per shot. So that's 158.4 grams of ethanol. Women have an alcohol distribution ratio of about 0.55 and an elimination rate of about 0.015% per hour. So by the Commonwealth's calculation, her last drink was at 12:45 a.m. through to 9 a.m., which is 8.25 hours. If we plug all of these numbers into the Widmark formula and resolve the equation, then her estimated BAC at 12:45 a.m. immediately after the last drink would be 0.640. This is a lethal BAC, and it's nowhere near the number that they came up with, which was 0.292%. And after 8.25 hours of elimination, she should be around the 0.516%, which is still a fatal BAC level. At 0.64 BAC, she would likely be unconscious, in a coma, or dead. At 0.516 by 9 a.m, she would still be non-functional. So the prosecution's claim of 9 drinks over 3 hours defies human physiology and known BAC survival limits. Let's take a closer look at levels of impairment. 0.08 is the legal intoxication in many jurisdictions. 0.15 is a major impairment, significant loss of motor control. 0.2, confusion and possible blackouts. 0.3, stupor, potential loss of consciousness. And 0.4 and above, risk of coma and death due to respiratory arrest. The Commonwealth claim of 0.292 is dangerously close to the 0.3 threshold, where individuals often experience stupor or unconsciousness. At this level, the central nervous system is severely depressed, leading to profound confusion or stupor, inability to stand or walk, let alone reverse a vehicle at 24.2 miles per hour, vomiting, loss of consciousness, and potential respiratory depression. People measuring around the 0.35% mark are often intubated. Thus, it is highly improbable that an individual at a 0.929% BAC could function normally or engage in complex tasks such as driving. According to case studies and medical literature, BAC levels exceeding 0.30 are associated with severe toxicity. 0.3 to 0.4 are likely to cause alcohol poisoning, loss of consciousness, and life-threatening conditions. And that's in a normal, healthy person. Over 0.4 is potentially fatal and a risk of coma and death from respiratory arrest. This tells us that the prosecution's claim that Karen Reid had a 0.292% BAC at the time of the incident is inconsistent with established medical knowledge. Such a BAC level would likely result in severe impairment or unconsciousness, making it improbable for her to perform routine activities. This discrepancy raises significant questions about the accuracy of the prosecution's BAC extrapolation and its applicability in this case. So now we need to do more math to reverse engineer the prosecution's 0.292% BAC level back to how many vodka shots she would have had to have drunk to reach between 0.7 and 0.8 by 9 a.m. I'll spare you all the math lesson on how to reverse engineer the Widmark formula, and we'll just jump straight to the answer. Okay, the prosecution's claim is that she had a BAC at 12:45 a.m. of 0.292% and a BAC at 9 a.m. of 0.07% to 0.08%. And if that was really her reading at 9 a.m., then the maths says she should have had a BAC of approximately 0.194% to 0.204% at 12:15 a.m., not 0.292% as the prosecution claims. What I'm saying here is when you work the formula backwards, their own maths doesn't add up. In fact, if their maths is even close at 9 a.m., then it's probably around the 3 drinks that we thought she drank. The prosecution's own numbers completely disprove the prosecution's own extrapolation. They can't claim she had a 0.292% BAC at 12:45 a.m. while also claiming she had a 0.07 to 0.08% at 9 a.m. Here's a visual of the claim that the prosecution makes, which is the yellow dotted line, and the correct BAC based on actual science, which is the red line. They're suggesting that Karen lost 0.212 to 0.222% BAC over 8.25 hours. However, at a normal alcohol elimination rate of 0.015% per hour, she would have only lost about 0.124% over the same period of time. That means her real BAC at 12:40 a.m. should have been, according to their own numbers, around 0.194 to 0.204, not 0.292. That's like a 50% difference. So, how did we reverse engineer their mistake? Of course, using the Widmark formula, we would plug in the real science. So using their value to reach 0.292 at 12:45 a.m, they say she would have needed to drink about 9 vodka shots. But based on the real elimination rate, 9 vodka shots should have seen her BAC level at around 0.194 to 0.204 at 12:45 a.m. But those values actually come to about 3 vodka shots, which is what we counted in my counting drinks video. What we could physically see her actually drinking, not while her back was turned to us or hidden behind other things or people, but what we actually saw her drinking. So essentially, for Karen Reid to have reduced her BAC level of 0.292 at 12:45 a.m, down to 0.07 to 0.08 by 9 a.m, their math doesn't just stretch the truth, it breaks the laws of human metabolism. Now, if you're a curious little bunny like myself, you're probably wondering, how did they botch the numbers so badly? What, did they get Trooper Paul to do the math? Well, I wish it was that simple. The answer lies in their repeated use of the term Serum Plasma BAC. As we've already discovered, these are not one thing, but 2 separate methods, and either will produce inflated numbers unless they're converted to whole blood first. This chart shows the prosecution's rigged numbers using unconverted plasma results. This is the red dotted line. The blue line shows a whole blood conversion before extrapolation. So essentially, they started with a bogus number, and then they did bogus math on top of it. The green line shows you the correct forensic BAC extrapolation. So we're applying the proper elimination rate to the whole blood conversion. The difference between the red dotted line, their bogus numbers, and the actual forensic, scientifically valid BAC is nearly 50%. This is just the plasma results. But what if I'm wrong? What if they did convert to whole blood first? How would that change the numbers? This table shows us that they didn't use whole blood conversion. So the first column is the category that we're talking about. The next 2 columns are the claims by the prosecution. The first column is the claim that they've made. The second column assumes what if they did adjust it to whole blood conversion. And the last column is the scientific calculation. So if they did adjust it for whole blood, they would have ended up with 0.6 to 0.68 for the plasma BAC at 9 a.m. But that would have made their 12:45 a.m. extrapolation of 0.292 incorrect. The correct value would be 0.248 if they had calculated the whole blood conversion. The scientific BAC calculation assumes the 3 drinks that we counted and the last drink we saw her have at the waterfall at midnight, which would give a whole blood BAC of 0.168 at midnight, and that extrapolation should have brought her blood alcohol level down to 0.033 by 9 a.m. This table is pretty much the same thing, but it's based on a serum BAC. If they had adjusted the serum properly converted to whole blood, then they would have ended up with 0.056 to 0.064 at 9 a.m, but then their 0.292% still would be incorrect. The scientific calculation for serum BAC, based on 3 drinks at midnight, would put her BAC level at 0.168%. Using statistical probability, the chance that the prosecution's BAC was properly converted but still ended up inflated is virtually 0. I'm not sure that this is necessary, but just in case, there is also a formula to calculate the scientific certainty that the serum or plasma test was never converted to whole blood before extrapolation. Based on Karen's body weight being 45 to 50 kilos and the 3 drinks that we counted, there's a 100% scientific certainty that the prosecution's numbers are artificially inflated. Given all the chicanery that we have discovered in this whole case to date, I'm even skeptical that this blood draw even came from Karen. I would want to see the actual numbers from the actual hospital sitting right next to the numbers that the crime lab used before I would even begin to believe that these numbers came from Karen's own blood. Either way, plasma and serum tests are no good to anybody unless they've been converted to whole blood. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
The data don't lie, people do.